Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I've gotten shit from people, and it is what it is. I understand it. I put this out, so I understand I'm going to get some of this back. But over my position in regards to not voting for somebody who doesn't represent your interests, I've been very clear on this. Either the Democratic Party needs to change or it needs to be destroyed. Pick a pony. I don't care which. I have no feelings for it in this way. What I do want are certain policy positions that are advocated. I want people to actually represent those interests. If you have to push and cajole and scream and yell at in order to get somebody to move to a particular position, then they're not representing that position. Meaning, if we're having a conversation and you're telling me that I should get behind what the Democratic Party is doing because of Donald Trump, I should get behind what the Democratic Party is doing because it's trying to change, I should get behind it because we have a unity commission and all this other stuff. If you're telling me that lefties should fall in line with Democrats, then you need to explain to me why. And you need to explain to me how that's fundamentally different than the previous times that lefties supported Democrats. Even though lefties didn't get any of the policy positions that they wanted, were not even talked about, was essentially put to the corner, were shamed and called, sore losers until they needed their votes. Once you needed the vote, it's certainly you have to vote for this person. What are you going to do? Support Donald Trump? If you're not voting for Hillary Clinton, then you're voting for Donald Trump, etc., etc., etc. Least worse. The argument is always least worse. And I strongly suspect that part of the reason why people have lost faith, have lost interest in supporting Democrats, and have moved to these other parties, have stopped voting at all, or hell, in some cases, went to Donald Trump, is because the things that you say are completely disconnected from the things that you do. No one knows what you represent, and even the people that have some inkling of what you represent realizes it's not them. You don't represent them. You don't represent the interests of the American public. If the American public is on board for something, meaning if you have a majority of the population that says, yes, I want this, this is what I want, and if you have Democrats in Congress who say, no, we can't do that, then the first question becomes, well, wait a minute, what is your responsibility in Congress? Is your responsibility to affect the will of the people, to essentially to be their representatives in the act of creating laws to represent their interests? You guys are paid by your donors to represent the interests of the donors. But I'm making this point that in the larger context of American politics, it's not supposed to work that way. The House of Representatives, the Senate, you're supposed to be the arm of the American public, the avatar of the will of the American public. If a Democrat cannot get on board with Medicare for all, then that Democrat shouldn't get your vote. This is the weakest of litmus tests. This is easy. You are functioning as a Democrat, and Democrats have screamed at one mic after the next that they believe that healthcare should be a right. Fair enough. I agree that healthcare should be a right too. How are you going to do it? How do you make it a right? How do you make it a right? By proclamation in the way that Obama did, everybody should have health care, or otherwise you're going to get some kind of penalty from the government. You understand that proclaiming something is not the same thing as making something easier to do, making something more available, particularly to the least of us. If Obamacare is what democratic values represent, that health care plan left 20 million people off the rolls, and people were still going bankrupt, being eaten to death by coverage fees. Obama didn't want to challenge the drug companies, so the United States government in no way can negotiate for drug costs. Also, you have this thing where you left these leeches into the healthcare system, allowing them to max out at a certain amount in regards to the profits that they make, but you're still allowing them to rape the public for those profits. Those companies are completely unnecessary. Medicare has like a 2% overhead compared to like a 30% overhead of the other healthcare companies. People in Medicare aren't paying themselves millions of dollars in regards to fees or paying their salaries of millions of dollars. Medicare, for the most part, is more efficient than any of those plans, and it keeps healthcare costs down better than any of those plans. They're not trying to grease their pockets. The whole point of healthcare is healthcare. Medicare for all would have been the least that shouldn't have been done. Should have been the least. Universal health care should have been what Democrats were striving for. But at the very least, Medicare for all is a decent step in the direction of health care for everybody in this country. You have to ask the question of why Obama wasn't on board for that. You also have to ask the question, like right now, when Bernie Sanders has been pushing Medicare for all and has been getting all these people on board for this, are the Democrats on board for Medicare for all? That's the question. I would make the case that this should be a litmus test. Any Democrat that looks at this process and says, okay, I'm going to vote Democrat because I always vote Democrat, you at the very least should understand what you're voting for. And you need to understand that you should want more out of your party than apathy. You should want more than apathy. It's one thing to have a party that actually full-throatedly represents your interests. There is no way you can say that's what the Democratic Party has done. And even right now with Donald Trump, the grossest impression of American power that has ever taken that office, in that office, even now with that god-awful tax bill that was essentially a ripoff to the top 1%, giving trillions of dollars to the top 1%. Despite all of that, Democrats still cannot come up with a decent argument to go against Trump. And for the most part, has used Russia and Trump and Nazis and Trump and everything else, as opposed to coming up with a decent strategy for themselves, what they themselves represent, and enshrine that into the American consciousness. What we know is the billionaires, the plutocrats, have given expressed orders, and you ask me how I know this because it happened on national television, that if they're going to have a conversation about class, then he's not going to give them any money. It's not going to give them any money. Talking about healthcare, talking about free college, those are things that directly empower the populace itself. And those are things that this weak center-right Democratic Party, regardless of what they say in a unity commission, regardless of how they say they've changed in this quote-unquote better deal, at the end of the day, brass tacks, when you ask them what they represent, what are they willing to support, you still get the milk, toast, markets over people approach that Democrats have had for the last 40 or 50 years. Chuck Schumer is being asked about Medicare for all. Let's hear what Chuck has to say. This is a Jimmy Dore clip. Somebody essentially asked Chuck Schumer about Medicare for all. Chuck Schumer sent him back a response. Jimmy Dore is reading that response.
And so recently someone who listens to the show or watches the show sent an email to Chucky the Shoom asking him his stance on single payer. They forwarded me the response. Here's the response that Chucky the Shoom gave. I'm going to read it to you. Thank you for writing to express your support for the adoption of single payer system. I agree that a health care is a right, not a privilege. Oh, good. Then you'll be for a single payer, I guess. If he says it's. I strongly support the establishment of a public health insurance option.
Boo. Come on.
You know, just like the rest of the world. Oh, that's not how they do it? A public health insurance option would create a not-for-profit insurance plan, which would compete on a level playing field with existing private health insurance plans. Chucky the Shoe, bought and paid for. Chucky the Shoe. Now you wonder why we got Trump? You wonder why it's Mick resistance, why it's all fake? They're all corporate tools. Chucky the Shoe, corporate tool. A public not-for-profit insurance option would require lower premiums and lower existing private insurance premiums through competition. Hey, we still pay twice as much as the rest of the world. And how many millions of people would be left out? Obamacare leaves out around 30 million people. This pro-consumer option, I like how he has the corporate speak.
Oh, yeah, big-time corporate speak. Even just like the whole concept of competition. We're not widgets. We're human beings. Where does competition come into play here?
Yeah.
Hey, you're sick. Do you want to get better?
Or do you want to compete?
Well, let's see.
You ready to compete? I'm sick. Let's compete.
What's the competition offering?
We want single payer like the rest of the world. I believe that no American should be denied coverage. No, it's not coverage. No American should be denied health care. So this has got, again, you wonder why half the country doesn't vote. You wonder why we have Trump. You wonder why people don't see a difference. You wonder why. Here it is. the majority of not only Democrats, the majority of Republicans, the majority of the country is for single payer. That's the leader of the Democrats. He's not with the people. He's against the people. The leader of the Democrats against the people, and you wonder why I won't vote for them? You really wonder why? I know why you vote for them, because you're soft-brained. I know why you vote for Democrats. You're soft-brained, and you can't think past one election cycle. That's why you keep doing this. I will continue to fight for access to affordable and quality health care for all Americans.
Essentially, are you for single payer? Chuck Schumer's answer is no. Chuck Schumer's answer is no. That is the most tepid of things that you could push for. And they still can't get on board for it. He supports a public option. That's great. Competition. And yeah, Jimmy Dore is right. It's like, oh, I've broken my leg. Okay, my insurance company now can compete with the other insurance companies. These things are leeches. And Chuck Schumer's answer shows you who they represent. When you're thinking about the Unity Commission and everything else, keep in mind Chuck Schumer's answer on this. When you're thinking about going to the polls and voting for Democrats, keep in mind Chuck Schumer's answer. If Chuck Schumer can't even get behind something as basic as single payer to make sure each and every person has health care, understand Chuck Schumer making that choice is making a choice to leave certain people off the health care rolls purely for this idea of profit. The Democratic Party, the full-on market-driven solution to every fucking thing, and believing that if you bend the edges a little bit and make it a little bit better, that they'll get votes because Republicans are just so much worse. The point I'm trying to make here is, if you're going to vote for a party, if you're going to support a party, if you're going to send money to a party, if you're going to give those vocal support, shouldn't that party represent your interests? And I understand that Republicans are batshit crazy, but from one election cycle to the next, you get milquetoast Democrats that in no way challenge the people who are giving them cash. Yes, they would support your identity because, again, identity doesn't affect the people who are giving them cash. Class is the issue. Class is the thing they won't touch. And issues of class does boil down in many respects to issues of healthcare, issues of college, whether or not these guys are going to raise taxes to go after certain factions of the public that have advantaged themselves magnificently well while the rest of the public has not. You know what would help somebody who's have a difficult, in a rough situation? When you have half of the country, the majority of the country, if they got a $500 car bill, unexpected car bill, they wouldn't be able to pay it. You know what would help the country, Chuck? Since the country is already behind this idea of single-payer health care, if that guy who can't afford a $500 bill or $500 random bill, if that guy had health care when he needed health care, do you think that would actually help that guy? Do you think that would materially make his life better if he had access to health care? If he had a $500 bill, he couldn't pay it. But if he had health care, at the very least, $500 bill wouldn't touch him. He can get sick, and you wouldn't go into debt trying to pay back some random bill. Same thing with, and look, but personally, I think universal health care is better, where that stuff is just paid for, kind of like it's in London or France. You go to the doctor, the bill is covered, everything is straight. You don't necessarily have to come out of your pocket for that stuff. They take that up, taxes and whatnot. You may pay a little bit more in taxes, but ultimately what you get in the care far exceeds whatever you're paying in taxes at that point. But whatever, Medicare for all is a decent step towards something like that. I'm just making this point that if the Democratic Party is supposed to represent issues on the left, if that's what the point is supposed to be, and you can't even get the leader in the Senate to get behind a basic healthcare plan that pretty much every other industrialized nation, at least in Europe, has, then why are you voting for Democrats? Why? What are you getting out of this? Is your vote purely there just because you're terrified of Republicans? In which case, you're perfectly content with Democratic apathy just because you're scared of the other guys. At which point do you contest what takes place? Meaning, at which point are you vocal to get across that there are things that the public wants, there are positions that you need to represent if you're going to be a Democrat, or you're not going to get our vote? Meaning, you're actually making your vote count. You're saying, I'm going to either use it against you, or I'm going to use it or just not vote at all if you don't necessarily represent my interests, and have enough of those people who are willing to make that stance and make that point that you're not going to get our vote if you don't represent our interests. Meaning, if you're not going to push for the tepid measure of Medicare for all, then you shouldn't give them your vote. Why? Because you're terrified of Republicans. What is the point of politics? Is the point of politics to get things done, or is the point of politics to play politics? Meaning, if we have certain dangers and certain issues that we need to address as a society, but we can never address those issues because the party that's on the left is really on the right if they were in any other country, and ultimately do not agree with these lefty items. For the most part, they have this idea of a market-driven solution to pretty much everything. And when they get into power, they're so tepid and they're so soft, and they don't really get anything done. If we have dangers, be it economic, be it environmental, be it ecological, don't you want some kind of edifice, some kind of vehicle to get those things done and to get those things accomplished, or at the very least to talk about and discuss and put those things on the table for debate? Do you believe that the Democratic Party in any way is going to deal with issues of ecology, issues of economics, in a way that's suitable to the 99%? Have they for the past 30 years? That answer, of course, is no. They continuously look at you and say, you have nowhere else to go. You must vote for us. You have nowhere else to go. And many people comply and they agree and said, I get it. This other guy is horrible, so I'm going to give this milquetoast guy my vote. I'm saying every time you give that milquetoast guy your vote, you incentivize them to put up another milquetoast guy who's not going to represent your interests. At some point, you need to have the balls to say, no, I am done. Not just I am done. If you put up somebody like that, I am going to be against that person. I'm going to be vocally against that person. At the end of the day, that person will not get my vote. You need to be willing to allow the Democrats to lose, even if you need to go through some discomfort with a Republican in that office. Nothing takes place. Nothing changes as long as that party believes that it can behave that way, or until another party springs up to take its place. I'm sick of this holding pattern. I'm sick of this vacillating back and forth. Republicans put in horrible legislation. The Democrats are so weak they just seal in the legislation that the Republicans put in. I'm sick of this game. This is a fucking Ponzi scheme. This was, or I should say, a scam. You need to be willing to say no. You need to be willing to vote outside of this two-party system until people get to the point of being able to say, this person does not represent my interests, so they're not getting my vote. Until the party system understands that people are not going to support them until they represent their interests, nothing changes. Until that gets through, nothing changes. The electorate needs courage. That's the point. Chuck Schumer needs to understand that Chuck Schumer would lose in the next ballot, that Democrats would lose if they don't represent that particular thing, meaning if they don't get behind that particular agenda. The most tepid of agendas. Most tepid of agendas. And you still can't get the leader of the Democrats in the Senate to get behind it. If he can't get behind something that's going to beneficially affect 30 million Americans, because it's around 30 million that still didn't have access to health care with Obamacare, then why are you getting behind him? Why are you getting behind him? I will leave it at that. It is amazing that Schumer is not behind Medicare for all. And you have to start asking the questions of why. What is the incentive for him not to be behind it when you have the overwhelming majority of the public saying that the government should supply health care? I'll leave it at that. I don't want to be the dead horse. I just think this is so tepid of something. Like, this is so tepid of a measure. Hey, we believe that our citizens are valuable, right? Yes. If we believe that the people of this country have value, shouldn't we make sure that their vehicle is taken care of, the thing, the avatar, the thing that they express themselves with in this particular environment? Shouldn't we as a collective, as a society, come together to make sure people have access to medical care without going into hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? Richest country on the planet. They're bragging about the stock market hitting 25,000. We just put $80 billion on a budget that had already hit $1 trillion a year. Are you telling me that we don't have the resources to make sure that the people in the country are taken care of without spending 4 times as much as everywhere else? Or 2 times as much, it might have gone down, but far more than everybody else in every other country with the sense of healthcare. So I'll leave it at that. Try not to beat a dead horse and repeat myself. Yeah. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys.